Shalom and welcome to the One Pasuk podcast, where the rabbis at Congregation Avas Torah each share an insight on one particular pasuk from the parsha and reflect on each other's ideas. Rabbinic banter, I like to call it. I am Chaim Pupko, and I am joined by my dear friends and teammates, Rabbi Daniel Goldberg.
Shalom.
And Rabbi Morty Kisus.
Shalom.
All right, here we go. Our one pasuk for this week, Parshas Vayikra, opening up a new sefer of the Chamisha Chumshei Torah, of the 5 books of Moses. Perek Aleph, pasuk Aleph, the very first verse, Vayikra el Moshe, Vayidaber Hashem elav me'ohel moed lemor. Hashem calls to Moshe, and Hashem speaks to him from the Ohel Moed. Now, this pasuk doesn't seem to be saying all that much. It seems to be just a summons. He's calling to Moshe, but we don't know what he's going to say yet until we get to the next pasuk. So it may seem like there's not so much to say about this pasuk, but indeed there is a great deal to say about this pasuk. Who's going to lead us off?
The Medrash actually says something fascinating. It's a little bit of a gut punch because it seems to come out of left field. It says, Kol Talmud Chacham she'ein bo das nevela tova himena. Any Talmud Chacham, great Torah scholar, who doesn't have a certain kind of wisdom, I'll say, an animal carcass is better than him. Okay, so what does that mean, and what does this have to do with this opening pasuk? So to appreciate that, you have to go back to really the end of Sefer Shmos, with the inauguration of the Mishkan, right? The end of Shmos is this magical moment, this incredible moment where Hashem's Shekhinah rests on the Mishkan. It's alive, it works, all the components have come together to build this home for the Ribono Shel Olam in this world. It's amazing, but there's a question that looms large, and that is, okay, well, what's next? What do we do now? And it's actually a question that kind of hangs over the gap between the conclusion of Sefer Shmos and the beginning of Sefer Vayikra. What happens next? And a fool may have simply rushed in to just begin and start and not ask any questions. But Moshe Rabbeinu had the wisdom. He wasn't just a Talmid Chacham, but he was a bardas. He was a person of great, in the highest, most profound sense. He was a wise person who understood how to use the depth of his Torah learning, and he understood that we have to wait. We actually have to wait until Vayikra, until Hashem summons us, or one of us, into the Mishkan. That is the great wisdom that could have been lacking from another person. That was, of course, not lacking from Moshe Rabbeinu. That was the das, the wisdom of this moment, to wait until we were summoned. And I think there's a few different ideas to think about here, but the one that I'll focus our attention on is the idea that sometimes it takes wisdom to hold ourselves back when our intuition and our excitement beckons us forward to go and start or do or engage, or in so many different applications of life. The wise approach is to be able to say, wait, we have to wait. We have to make sure it's the right moment, that we do this in the right way, that we're progressing with wisdom.
That's beautiful. It's beautiful. You have to know when to hold them and know when to fold them.
Exactly.
But, it's interesting. You reminded me of a pasuk which says differently, but it doesn't take anything away from the beautiful lesson because it's talking about another extreme. The pasuk in Gohela says, Shomer Ruach Lo Yizra, somebody who waits for the atmosphere to be perfect to plant their crops will never plant, because if you wait for perfection's never going to come. What you have with your lesson and this one together is that, you don't go to either extreme. You really have to, mindfulness is, the word of the day. Mindfulness is what you need to really determine when is the right moment, when's the appropriate moment.
Yeah, it's definitely a tension in life. But if you're feeling the tension and you're thinking about both of these factors, it probably helps you get more or less to the right medium.
Famously, the Torah records the word Vayikra with a small aleph. There's much to do about this small aleph. If you actually had the opportunity to look inside the Torah, you'll notice that all the letters are written in one size font, and this aleph is minimized. And one fascinating idea I saw was that Moshe Rabbeinu was obviously, in his great humility, trying to appear that Hashem just, in happenstance, a casual encounter, decided to speak with Moshe. As the Pasuk records, when God spoke to Bilam, it says, Vayikad, God just called out to him. It wasn't necessarily a summons. It wasn't necessarily an intimate conversation, but just one that kind of just happened on its own. However, when it came to Moshe, God uses the word Vayikra. Moshe was overwhelmed with that uniqueness and that ability for him to be considered so lofty and elevated that God is communicating directly with him, that he tried to minimize the letter. Now, Rav Shach asks that we understand there's so much science in the way God chooses to write the Torah. And if there's a smaller letter, there's less that we can derive from that when we are Doresh the Torah. And so why would Moshe Rabbeinu be looking to minimize what we could learn from the Torah? He should have just said, you know what, this is the reality. This is what I have to deal with. Let me move on. And Rav Shach says that Moshe was attempting to teach us the importance of humility. And because he understood that now, as much as I feel that Hashem is giving me this tremendous honor by reaching out to me directly, perhaps I can teach Am Yisrael a very important lesson in humility. But if we think about that, okay, great. So there was this lesson in humility, but at the same time, it was coming at this expense, which we mentioned. And we always have to think about the tension between what we're trying to accomplish and maybe what the lesson that portrays is. But he takes it one step further, and he explains that what Moshe was really trying to teach us and why God overrode Moshe's decision was, yes, humility is profoundly important. So why then didn't God just record Vayikra? Why did God say, Moshe, as much as this is important in humility, I can't allow you to take that lesson so far. I still have to record a small aleph. And that was because Hashem felt it was important that we, as Bnei Yisrael, recognize that Hashem wants to communicate with us directly. Hashem doesn't interact with us and communicate with us like he does with Bilam. Bilam, yes, it happens in happenstance. Sometimes God is forced to give over a message. But with Am Yisrael and Moshe Rabbeinu here in particular, God desperately seeks that relationship with us. And so the Torah records Vayikra with a small aleph. Moshe, humility is very important, but I cannot take out the aleph. We'll minimize the aleph because ultimately I want Bnei Yisrael to know that I care deeply to have that interaction with them, to be able to know that I want to approach you directly to communicate because that's how much I love each and every member of the Jewish people.
So you're describing basically like a tug of war. Like the default would be to write Vayikra to indicate Hashem's love for the Jewish people and his desire to speak with us. If it was up to Moshe, it would be Vayikar to minimize the extent to which Hashem speaks to him and, you know, his role and the status that he attains. And so we kind of end up in the middle with like this small aleph to try and...
As a compromise.
As a kind of a compromise position. That's very, very interesting.
Well, I think it's on brand for Moshe because the Torah tells us that Moshe was anav mikol adam. He was more humble than any other person. And so this is just another great example. In fact, what's great about this example that Moshe demonstrates it here at this moment is, you know, this is the time for Moshe to really feel like he's established. He delivered the Torah. He completed the project of the Mishkan, delivered it on time, on budget, right? He's Moshe Rabbeinu, and his connection with Hashem couldn't be closer at this moment. And so at this very moment, right, that's, you know, when we have a special relationship with someone, like we nurture it and we protect it, we want to maintain it. And Moshe did not feel in any way like my relationship with Hashem is so special. It's just me and him, and I'm going to protect it and keep it for myself. Like, no, even that, like that biggest, that most important relationship, he was humble about that too. You know, imagine like, you know, you have the ear of, I talk to LeBron James every other day, right? So that's a point of pride. And like, I'm not just going to give out his phone number to everybody else. Moshe Rabbeinu would literally give out his phone number to everybody else. He'd be the worst friend.
Yeah, but what I loved about it specifically was how Hashem just overrode him and said, like, as much as that is important, there's something else that's important too. So it's like that is absolutely on brand for Moshe Rabbeinu to find the place of maximum humility. Let's take out the aleph entirely. God just so happened to chance encounter. But no, Hashem says there's something else here that your humility would get in the way of. And so I feel the need to communicate this through that small aleph.
I think what I prepare, dovetails with that. So many ask why Hashem summons Moshe with this word, Vayikra. Typically, it's Vayidaber Hashem al Moshe lemor. But here, there's this special summons, Vayikra. He calls out to Moshe. Pashut Pshat is that it's because Moshe got kicked out, right? The Mishkan was just completed. And when the Mishkan was completed, Hashem's cloud, the cloud of Hashem's presence came down into the Kodesh HaKadoshim, and Moshe, the pasuk says, Moshe was not able to stand there, and he had to leave, he had to depart. And so Vayikra is calling him back, like, okay, now that you left, come back. But Rashi quotes a medrash that's so interesting, and I think it adds another deeper layer to this, because Rashi quotes a medrash which says that Hashem's voice at that moment, Hashem called out, and only Moshe could hear his voice. Right? Hashem called out, as it were, and anybody could have heard him, but only Moshe heard him. What does this mean? So I believe this medrash is teaching us that now that the Mishkan's completed, we're in a new era of divine revelation. That the Mishkan now gives Hashem this focal point by which to connect with Bnei Yisrael that they didn't have before. What was beforehand? Beforehand, actually, Hashem essentially revealed himself to everyone through miracles, right? What even a person on the lowliest strata of society, Masherasa Shivcha Alayam, what even a maidservant saw at the splitting of the sea, even the Nevi'im, Yeshaya, Yechezkel did not even see it. Everyone had a revelation of Hashem. Everyone could have that intense and close connection with Hashem. But now that the Mishkan is built, Hashem is initiating a new era, as it were. One in which there would be less miracles, one in which people would now begin to build regular everyday lives. And in those regular everyday lives, a person has to strive to create that connection with Hashem. A person has to put in the work. And so Hashem calls out. Hashem calls out to everybody. But Moshe was the only one at that moment who had the capacity to hear the voice of Hashem. And so he was called, he was summoned into the Ohel Moed. But the lesson is that everyone else, Bnei Yisrael, that voice is still calling out. And it's up to us to be able to hear that voice and to establish that relationship. There are a number of lessons that can come from this, but I think the most important one is that if we want to feel inspired, if we want to feel closer to Hashem, and we don't know how, we don't feel like we have the tools, the first step, the most important thing, is to just show up and to be there. Meaning, just go to shul, even if davening is not moving. Just go to a class, even if it isn't enjoyable. Because the more time you spend doing mitzvos, studying Torah, davening, then there are more opportunities for you to hear that voice when it comes. If you've made yourself available to Hashem, then you're more likely to hear it. That's the summons for each one of us to find that connection.
Which reminds me of the Mishnah in Perkei Avot. The Mishnah says, Kol yom vayom, bat kol yotzat mahar horeb ve'omer oy lahem labiriyot me'albona shel Torah. Famously, the Baal Shem Tov asks a question. If there's a bat kol that goes out, how come I didn't hear it? And if the bat kol goes out and I can hear it, so why does the bat kol go out? What's the point? And he answers that we do hear it. When we go and find ourselves in a situation where suddenly we process something that inspires us, that's the bat kol. Yep. So yes, absolutely. We have to be in position, like Rabbi Pupko said, to hear it. Because maybe you're sitting at that class and the first half of it, you're like unengaged and uninterested, and then suddenly something resonates. And that inspires you to be able to accomplish so much more. But if you're not in position to be able to receive those inspirations, then yes, oy lahem labiriyot me'albona shel Torah, we are desecrating the Torah and embarrassing the Torah because we don't feel that it's important enough to have our antennas up, to be able to hear those different opportunities throughout our life that can inspire us to change, to improve, to become better, and to get closer to Hashem.
By the way, I love that antenna metaphor. I've used that antenna metaphor a lot, especially when it comes to Kabbalah and Jewish mysticism. All that mystical stuff, it's all true, and it's all there. It's just, do you have the antenna to pick up the reception? Those who are true mystics, true Kabbalists, they have a more refined, a better, more effective antenna. Hashem doesn't expect all of us to have that kind of antenna, but certainly the ones for Torah and mitzvos.
Beautiful.
שיהיו פנויים בתורה ובחוכמה כדי